Okay, hello everyone. I'm Joost Huizinga, and I will be presenting my research together with Jean-Baptiste Moret and Jeff Kloon on evolving neural networks that are both modular and regular, HyperNEAT plus deconnection. The work is inspired to answer two questions, namely, how do we evolve intelligence and how did intelligence evolve in nature? To answer this question, it makes sense to look at our evolved networks. So look at the natural evolved networks and our artificially evolved networks. When we look at the naturally evolved networks, we see that they are structurally organized. While if we look at our artificially evolved neural networks, they often lack this structural organization. So, what do I mean with structurally organized? Well, I'm talking about these three key properties: modularity, regularity, and hierarchy. Well, for this research, we focus on modularity and regularity. So, modularity means consisting of distinct functional units, and you can often see this in engineer design, such as the pistons you might find in your car. For networks, it's a little bit different, and here we talk about consisting of highly connected groups of nodes that are only sparsely connected to each other. And here, the highly connected groups of nodes are the distinct units which create the modularity of your system. Regularity talks about the compressibility of a structure and often involves repetition, symmetry, or self-similarity. That may sound a little bit weird, but imagine that you have to describe this side of the building. All you really have to do is describe a single window and say that this window is repeated 10 times. In fact, you can go even further and just describe half the window and say that the other half of the window is symmetrical. You can do the exact same thing with neural networks, where in this neural network you probably only have to say that each neuron is connected to the 3 neurons right below it. Please note that modularity and regularity are two entirely distinct concepts. It's very easy for a network to be modular, have these highly connected cluster of nodes, but without some sort of pattern to it, it's modular but not regular. The other way around, if you have a very regular pattern in your network, but none of these clusters just uniformly connected, then you have regularity without modularity. So you really need both the highly connected clusters of nodes and a regular pattern to produce modular and regular networks. And note that this allows us the reuse of modules, which also allows for creating much more complex systems. So I said before that natural brains are modular and regular, but don't take it from me. Take it from the neuroscientists that actually study this kind of thing. So when neuroscientists divide the brain up into regions and examine their connectivity, they often find these beautiful modular structures inside the human brain. Second, natural brains are also regular. You can see this on a very high level scale in the general left-right symmetry of the brain. You can also see this on a very low level scale in just the reuse of individual neurons. Lastly, you can see this in an intermediate scale, as in the regular columnar structure that is found in the cortex, and that was first discovered by Mountcastle in 1955, but that remains relevant until this day. So, regular brains are modular and regular, or natural brains are modular and regular, but natural brains are also pink and a little bit squishy. So why do we care about modularity and regularity so much? Well, modularity has shown to improve evolvability and performance, because modular networks are easier to rewire, and it allows evolution to affect only a single module without completely butchering the performance of the entire system. Regularity likewise improves evolvability and performance because it allows for the reuse of patterns, and it allows for very small genotypes to encode for much larger phenotypes. So in this research, we will be evolving, or we will try and test whether we can evolve modular and regular networks. And we'll do so with two very general techniques, namely HyperNEAT for regularity and the connection cost technique for modularity. HyperNEAT was first presented at GECCO by Stanley et al. In 2009. The idea behind HyperNEAT is that we use the geometric location of nodes to determine the connectivity of a network. For example, let's say that we want to paint this picture. What we can do is we can take the coordinates of a single pixel, we can put those coordinates into some sort of function. We can get the output of the function, interpret the output as a grayscale value, and paint the pixel. If we do this for the next pixel, the input coordinates are different, meaning that the function might produce a different output, and thus we can paint our picture. We can do this for every single pixel in the figure. However, if we do this with a random function, we get some sort of random network. What we really want is we want to have the regularities, such as symmetry and repetition. So we want to be able to compose the regularities, and we do this using a compositional pattern producing network, where we can combine something like a Gaussian for a symmetric pattern, or a sine wave for a repeating pattern. And I can also show that this works. This is an image from PicReader, where users evolve, interactively evolve images. And as you can see, while this is a very complex figure, it also still is very regular, and it's definitely not a random figure. We can easily extend this idea of a CPPN to artificial neural networks. Instead of the coordinates of a pixel, we now give it the coordinates of two neurons. We get the output of the network, and we see that as the connectivity between those two neurons. If we do this for an entire network, we can see that HyperNEAT produces these beautiful regular networks, while a direct encoding will produce highly non-regular networks. So, 1 year later, disaster struck for HyperNEAT, as Sloan et al. In 2010 at GECCO showed that HyperNEAT could not produce modularity. Or to quote, HyperNEAT performed poorly on the problems and did not generate modular networks. Luckily, Verbensis and Stanley came to the rescue again 1 year later in 2011, where they had two very good innovations to make HyperNEAT produce modularity. Those were the link expression output and the Gaussian seed. So, the link expression output is an additional output added to the CPPN that determines whether a connection should be expressed or not. So basically, the weight is still determined by a weight output, but now the CPPN has a separate output to really carve out spaces for networks, make it much easier to create modular structures without affecting the behavior or without having to modify the weight of the network, which may negatively impact the problem. The Gaussian seed consists of several Gaussians that are seeded into the initial population. So every initial individual will start with this Gaussian seed. And these Gaussians are configured such that they only fire when the two input values to the Gaussian are close together, meaning that the Gaussians will produce a high output when the two neurons are close together, thus creating a bias towards locality. And these two innovations together produce modular networks with HyperNEAT. Now, in our research, we do use the link expression output because we think that this is an awesome innovation. However, we do not use the Gaussian seed. Instead, we use something different, namely the connection cost technique that was published by Sloan et al. In 2013. The idea behind the connection cost technique is that network has to pay for each connection they have, and they have to pay more for longer connections. So, in their struggle to remain competitive in the population, they reduce their number of connections, and they become modular in the process. Note that networks without connection cost don't do anything of the sort. Once they solve the problem, they remain as entangled as ever. So, why do we feel the need for the connection cost technique? Well, we already have the Gaussian seed. Well, the connection cost technique has very strong roots in biology, as there exist many costs for real-world connections. The cost to build the connection, the cost to maintain the connections, the cost to house the connections, the fact that longer connections take more time to propagate signals. And I'm not entirely sure about the roots in biology of the Gaussian seed. I'm not sure how that should work. The second thing that I like about the connection cost is that it's persistent. Because the Gaussian seed is it's simply a seed. It's just something all individuals start with, and it's part of the genome, meaning it can just completely evolve away. The connection cost, on the other hand, is persistent. So even if there exists no fitness gradient to preserve modularity, the connection cost will always be there, while the Gaussian seed may simply disappear. So, in short, in 2009, Stanley et al. Introduced HyperNEAT. In 2010, Kloon et al. Showed that HyperNEAT could not produce modular networks. Then 1 year later at GECCO, Probensis and Stanley showed that HyperNEAT could produce modular networks with Leo and the Gaussian seed. Then separately, Kloon in 2013 showed the connection cost, and right now, a few years later at GECCO, we'll be presenting our research where we think we have a more robust way of creating regular and modular networks with HyperNEAT and the connection cost. We want to test two hypotheses here, namely that combining HyperNEAT with the connection cost creates networks that are modular, regular, and high-performing. And the second is that HyperNEAT with the connection cost produces will outperform HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. So, we compare HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique against three different treatments, namely regular HyperNEAT, a direct encoding with the connection cost technique, which is basically the work Kloon et al. Did in 2013, and of course HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. Please note that all treatments, including regular HyperNEAT and HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique, do implement the link expression outputs, because we think it's a very essential extension to HyperNEAT in order for it to create modularity. So we test our hypothesis on the Retina problem. The problem in the Retina problem is we have a retina of 8 pixels, and the network has to tell whether there is both a left object and a right object present on the retina. Well, it's easy to see how this problem could be left-right decomposed into a left problem and a right problem, and then just combine the answer. But please note that you can still take the retina as it's in its entirety, creating a non-modular solution. Also note that the left objects and right objects are symmetrical, meaning there exists some sort of regularity for HyperNEAT to exploit. So let's look at the performance. Here in green we have HyperNEAT with a connection cost. In blue we have regular HyperNEAT. And in red we have HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. And below we have the significance indicators that indicate when a treatment is significantly different from HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique. As we can see, HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique performs significantly better for almost all generations than both HyperNEAT and HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. When we then look at the modularity of the problem, we see that again, HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique produces networks that are more modular than either regular HyperNEAT or HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. Note, by the way, that HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed starts with a very high modularity. That is, the Gaussian seed is doing its job. It is dividing this network into a modular construction. However, over time, the effect of the Gaussian seed seems to disappear. Basically, we have some evidence that the Gaussian seed does indeed evolve away in this case. HyperNEAT with the connection cost, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. It starts low, it starts to perform almost just like HyperNEAT, but over time, networks just become more modular and modular and modular. And they never lose this trait because the connection cost is persistent. We can also see this visually. In this visualization, we have colored the nodes according to their optimal split, and half of the nodes we've colored red, and with the other half we have colored blue. And as we can see here, HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique does really do a left-right modular decomposition. While HyperNEAT without the connection cost technique, it does some left-right decomposition, but it often doesn't get it entirely right, and it's highly entangled. Also, please note these are not the best networks. We have 100 runs. These are not the best networks. These are the median networks. Next, we have HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed. And HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed looks even more entangled at the end of evolution, and even manages to generate a top-bottom modularity, while the problem is left-right modular. Lastly, when we compare HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique against the direct encoding, we see that both treatments are modular. But both treatments are not regular. Because, and in this plot, what we did is we taken the phenotype produced by the direct encoding with the connection cost technique and the phenotypes produced by HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique, and we compressed them. And here we can see that HyperNEAT with the connection cost has a much higher compressibility than the direct encoding with the connection cost technique, and as a result, it's significantly, we have an indication that it's significantly more modular. We can also see the significantly more regular. We can also see this visually, where HyperNEAT with connection cost has this left-right symmetry, right? A green, while direct encoding creates two entirely different modules, where the modules don't even have the same number of nodes in the second layer. So, we also did compare HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique against regular HyperNEAT on two additional problems, namely the hierarchical XOR problem and the 5 XOR problem. The hierarchical XOR problem consists of two hierarchically nested XOR next to each other that have to be solved separately. Once again, we can see that HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique performs better through almost all generations, and it's more modular for a large portion of the generations. Again, we can see this visually in the median networks of our 100 runs. HyperNEAT with the connection cost really does a left-right modular split, while regular HyperNEAT still entangles some of the networks without there being any good reason to do so. Lastly, we have the 5 XOR problem, which are really just 5 XOR problems that have to be solved separately. Once again, we see that HyperNEAT with the connection cost produces a higher performance, and that HyperNEAT with the connection cost produces a higher modularity. And we can again see this visually, where HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique really just repeats the same module over and over again, while regular HyperNEAT still entangles the different problems, and well, as a result, it fails to solve the problem in these cases. Okay, so for future work, what we want to do is we want to extend our organizational properties of modularity and regularity with hierarchy. And in fact, we are already working on the research, and we have some very promising results. So the paper will be coming soon. Second, we want to expand our problem to larger and more complex problems, where the regularity and modularity can really shine, because modules can be built upon and really produce these complex systems. Third, it would be very interesting to see an interaction between these regular networks, regular modular networks with learning, because HyperNEAT has trouble with irregularity. But if we add learning, we might be able to produce the same module over and over again. And if these modules are good general learners, during its lifetime, the individual may adjust each module to solve a variety of different tasks it has never seen before. Lastly, it would be very interesting to see what happens when we let HyperNEAT evolve the normal placement itself, as it might further improve its ability to really make a modular decomposition in physical space. So, in conclusion, we have shown that combining HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique does indeed lead to modular, regular, and high-performing networks, at least on our problems. Second, we have shown that HyperNEAT with the connection cost technique can outperform HyperNEAT with the Gaussian seed, again, on the problem we tested. And lastly, we think that HyperNEAT with the connection cost is an important step towards our goal of evolving truly intelligent machines. Thank you. a couple minutes for a question? Yeah, go ahead.
So you said that all HyperNEAT variants had the link expression output.
That's right.
Whereas traditional HyperNEAT, like proper release in 2009, didn't have anything like that. Did you implement it here? In what form?
What do you mean?
Did you simply not seed it? Was it just directly connected?
Yes, it was just directly connected. So just like regular HyperNEAT, we complexify our network. So we just have two outputs, the inputs, and then we just fully connect the initial network.
Okay, so
it's randomly determined weights.
So it's just not seeded with the Gaussian function.
It's just not seeded. That's the only difference between these two treatments. Yes.
Okay. I missed. My other question was, what is the cost function budget? I missed Jeff's talk.
Oh, the cost function budget is, in our case, the sum of the squared summed length of connections. So each neuron has a physical position in space, and we just sum the squared length of all the connections to create our cost. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
I guess I'll ask the obvious question of, can you combine, or what are your speculations on combining the Gaussian seed with the connection?
I think that the connection cost technique might really help to preserve the Gaussian seed, as it really gives this bias towards locality, and the connection cost technique rewards shorter networks, so the bias towards locality should always help. So my guess is that it will work really well and might really kickstart forming the modularity in the problem.
Bigger picture here. So you modulated this by using these pictures from brains.
Yes.
And indeed, they are quite remarkable. But the process that results in such modularity and regularity in the brain is a developmental process. It's on the genetic development.
Yes.
It's very different from what's going on in here. So you see this as an abstraction of that mechanism in the biology. And if so, you see some way of maybe implementing some other mechanisms, like you suggested, learning. And would you get some benefit if you had a lower level implementation? It doesn't have to be. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong. Abstractions are good, and if you try to get better performance, it's perfectly fine. But there is this underlying mechanism in biology. Is there any need to bring that in at some point?
Well, obviously, I don't know. But yes, HyperNEAT is really just the abstraction of the developmental process, where we basically say, well, we skip the development and we go straight to the final form using the gradients produced by
It's actually more the connection cost where that is implemented, right? When you're growing the brain, then you really have a cost on how long you can make those connections. I don't think the encoding brain.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was. Yes, once again, this is an abstraction. I mean, here we apply the cost to the fitness function rather than having a natural cost of producing each connection. There might be benefits of doing it in a natural way. I guess one of the things, for example, that just cannot occur in nature because it's physically impossible. If you have a very large neural network, you can't have a fully connected network. In our case, you can, and if it performs well, it will even survive, even though it's physically impossible. So maybe there is something to a slightly more natural way, where you maybe have some limit of the amount of resources you have, that you have to work within those limits. Would be an interesting thing to test, really. So I thank our speaker again.